I was very excited to get involved in this course. Like my colleague, Professor Ogilvie, it wasn't because I had any deep knowledge of what we were doing, but because it was such an exciting new area to explore. Whether we're talking about beliefs in the soul or beliefs in almost anything else in our daily lives, I think the core idea here and what made this course title important is that it's really something about beliefs. And humans just love to have beliefs about all sorts of things. And so one of my roles early on in the course is to talk about how we know stuff. And it doesn't really matter what stuff we're talking about. When we see something that we don't quite understand, when we have a pain in our gut that we don't quite understand, when we see people do things that we don't quite understand, we look for a reason. And until we find that reason, there's sort of a tension or anxiety that we carry around with us. And once we have it explained, the anxiety goes away and we're comfortable and ready to go on to whatever else we might be doing. And the cool thing about this is that the reason doesn't even have to be true. It just has to be a reason that we believe. And as a result of that, we have a long and continuing human history about things that go on around us that we have explained. And sometimes we explain them through astrology. Sometimes we explain them through witchcraft or by resorting to actions by gods or demons. And all of these are satisfying explanations. But starting mostly back in the 1400s, we began as a human species to look at different ways of knowing things, different ways of establishing our beliefs. And so one of the things that I begin with in this course is talking about big ideas. And they're big ideas because they opened up a new area of knowledge, and that new area of knowledge forced people to think about their beliefs. And it caused the same kind of confusion in many cases that Professor Ogilvie alluded to a while ago. One of the absolute most basic pieces of information that we consider a fact is that the Earth is flat. And right after that, all we have to do is look around us at the sky and the stars and the moon and the planets and the sun, and we realize immediately that the Earth is at the center of all of this, that the Earth is the center of the universe. And that explanation comforted thousands of generations of humans throughout our long history. But then some troublemakers came along. And this guy named Copernicus, working with lots of different mathematical formulas and information that he got from early astronomers and physicists and mathematicians, thought about this problem deeply and realized that if you put the sun at the center of those calculations instead of the Earth, that all of this complexity becomes simplified. And all of his scientific colleagues of the day, I'm sure, probably slapped their forehead and said, why did I not think of that? Because it was such a simple and elegant solution to the problem, that the Earth is not the center. The Earth is going around the sun. And at first glance, that seems like an innocent enough discovery, but people were terribly disturbed about this because that's not what they had believed. It's not what they had been told solemnly to believe. And so it was not welcomed information. And in the next generation, Galileo continued those teachings, telling the facts of the information. And the Catholic Church pulled him aside and gave him a choice and said, either you stop spreading this blasphemy about the earth not being at the center of the universe, or we'll kill you. It's your choice. And so he decided to recant and stop giving the lectures. But this is just one of the first early examples of how firm these belief systems can be and how difficult they are to dislodge. And that kind of became a theme that goes through the course, changing people's fundamental beliefs, their worldviews, if you will. So a big part of the course, as we go through from a whole different variety of topics, is to begin to talk about evidence and how we can sometimes change our beliefs based on evidence, and how often we ought to change our beliefs based on evidence. Certainly, one of the big ideas that caused a tremendous clamor at the time, about 150 years ago, was the work of Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. There's still a considerable amount of controversy about that theory even today, because it challenges human beliefs in a way that's even bigger than the belief systems that Copernicus and Galileo challenged. Because it's not just challenging what the earth is, where the earth is, it's challenging who we are in a very fundamental way. And there are just many people who are resistant to the idea that humans have a long natural history on this earth, and that humans and pre-humans go back so far in history that we were very different than we are today. So one of the things that I present in the course is the special features of ancient and modern humans that have evolved over this vast period of time. We spend a good bit of time talking about Descartes' mind-body problem. And this is another example of a belief that is very difficult to shake in many people. Almost everybody knows, they certainly know now, that our brain is controlling our behavior. Kids learn that on Sesame Street and have that idea implanted very early on. But it turns out it doesn't really matter much whether people know that fact, that the brain is the organ of behavior. We often have the wrong relationship, or we believe the wrong relationship between our brain and behavior. And it's very easy for us to have a belief that when we want to do something, we tell our brain, and our brain dutifully does it for us. And that, I'm afraid, is not really the way it works, that we are following the instructions of our brain, and there's no real evidence that we have this separate immaterial mind out here that controls the brain. But there's a very strong idea, difficult to shake, that we don't have a separate mind and a separate body. And of course, this then leads right into having a separate soul and a separate body. And it's easy to believe that separate immaterial thing can continue after the body no longer continues. We talk a lot about what the brain is doing because we know a lot about the brain now, and we know that certain parts of the brain do different things in other parts of the brain, and we can now begin to factually attribute many aspects of our behavior to things that are going on in the brain rather than having their origin out in some immaterial separate concept of the mind. We talk a lot about the traveling self. Traveling self is an interesting idea because we have the capability, and humans may have the unique capability of seeing ourselves in different places. So we can see ourselves where we were yesterday and be involved in the conversations we had yesterday. We can see ourselves in the future and imagine what we're going to do after we graduate from college or after we retire or whatever. We can look into the future. And if we look into the future far enough, we see an end to our life. And that is a very troublesome situation for many people. And that's where some of the soul belief systems begin to emerge. We talk about how the brain controls this traveling self and the regulation of emotions. And even though we have countless different religions across the face of the earth, and they all share some ideas about what people ought to do, and more importantly, according to the texts that are available, those ancient texts, they tend to focus on what we ought not to do. So one of the things that I talk about is the biology of thou shalt not, the brain structures that seemingly have built in some of the rules of society that are written in the ancient texts, but they may really have been perhaps more describing what the brain is doing rather than providing pronouncements about what the brain ought to do. It's a different way of looking at the problem. Professor Ogilvy showed you that whole list of countries and the percentage of people who say they believe in the soul. And the United States at 96% is right at or near the top of that list. When we take another question in other recent surveys and ask how many people believe in evolution, the United States is at the bottom of that list. Or near the bottom, certainly in industrialized and modern countries, that Americans seem to have a particularly difficult time accepting the ideas that humans have a long natural history on the face of the earth. And Darwin's theory just irritates the American public. At the end of the course, I present two famous examples of this, and there are many others not so famous, but skirmishes between people who have difficulty accepting evolution and want to keep it out of the public schools. Initially, this goes back to the Scopes trials back in the early part of the 1900s. And the Scopes trial, sometimes called the monkey trial, was one of the huge head-to-head confrontations between those who believe that evolution ought to be taught in the schools and those who are convinced that it's dangerous to the children and ought not to be taught in the schools. The Scopes trial has an interesting legal history. Legal scholars are still studying it today because it brought great orators together on either side of the issue, and then the final legal proceedings kind of ended with a thud because of some details of legal law. And then just recently, within the last decade, the Dover, Pennsylvania School Board brought in another attack on evolution being taught in the schools, and Judge John Jones had a very difficult and courageous decision, but ruled that there was no way to legally prevent evolution from being taught in the schools. So basically, what we are trying to do in this course is to bring in a whole variety of different approaches. As Professor Ogilvie suggested, some of them from anthropology, some of them from history and philosophy, from the biological aspects, and even from some of the legal aspects, to get the broadest possible view of soul beliefs and their causes and consequences. Although Professor Ogilvie and I are the primary instructors in this course, we have been very fortunate to bring in some guest speakers. From our psychology department, Professor Tracy Shores came in and talked to us a little bit about Buddhism that she has a special interest in. Professor Mussolino has a long-standing interest in soul beliefs, is currently in the process of writing a book on the topic, and presents a couple of magnificent lectures talking about the belief in the soul. Professor Sheldon Solomon is one of the world's authority on terror management theory, talking about some of the very special attributes of people thinking about death and how it changes their behavior. And Ozzie Grisman, a recent graduate in our graduate program here, has a special interest in evolutionary psychology and talks about that in one of the lectures. We also owe special thanks to the Rutgers School of Arts and Sciences, and especially to former Dean Douglas Greenberg, who was influential in starting the whole series of signature courses, and was generous enough to accept this idea for the Soul Beliefs course to go forward as one of those special courses. So this course, Soul Beliefs, Causes and Consequences, was very much a group effort and an important part of the undergraduate program at Rutgers, and it has certainly been a pleasure for both Professor Ogilvie and me to be involved with it, and thank you very much.